Welcome back to History Otherwise, where we explore the paths not taken in history.
It is good to be back.
Today, we aren't just looking at, dates on a timeline or lines on a map. We are stepping into a smoke-filled room in 1956 to watch a single decision rewrite the entire second half of the 20th century. We are doing a deep dive into the lion roars, a counterfactual analysis of the Suez Crisis.
This is one of the most compelling what-if scenarios we've ever looked at, I think. Because, well, usually when we look back, 1956 is the tombstone for the British Empire.
Right, it's the end.
It's universally accepted as the moment the game was up. But the sources we've analyzed for this, cabinet minutes, strategic projections, they all suggest that the line between that humiliation and a total transformative victory was razor thin.
It really is a game of inches. So for everyone listening, let's map out our journey. We've got three distinct acts.
Okay.
First, we are going to pinpoint that single moment, the Prime Minister's gamble that changed everything. Second, we'll look at the immediate explosion. A military victory, yes, but also a shattered relationship with America.
Which is a massive deal. I mean, it redefines the entire global economy.
Huge. And third, we'll explore the world that emerges from the ashes. A completely new global order where the Cold War isn't just a duel between Washington and Moscow.
No, it's a world where the special relationship dies and a new European power bloc is born. But before we get there, we really need to set the baseline.
Good point.
I suspect not everyone listening has a degree in mid-50s geopolitics.
Fair enough. Give us the timeline anchors. What's the 30-second version of what actually happened in our history?
Okay, baseline. July 1956. President Nasser of Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal. Now, I have to understand, this isn't just a waterway.
It's the jugular vein of the British economy.
Exactly. It's how the oil gets in. So Britain, France, and Israel concoct a secret plan to invade. They go in, but the United States President Eisenhower is furious. Under immense U.S. economic pressure, the British stop, turn around, and go home. A complete and utter humiliation.
That is the history we know. The Suez Crisis became shorthand for the end of empire. But let's go to November 6, 1956, the path not taken. We're inside 10 Downing Street.
The cabinet room.
It's thick with stale cigar smoke. It's raining outside. I mean, it's London in November. And the mood is absolutely grim. The pressure in that room was, well, psychological as much as political.
You can almost smell the anxiety. And at the center of this is Harold Macmillan, the Chancellor. Now, in our timeline, he is the one who blinks.
Right.
He comes to Prime Minister Anthony Eden with these terrifying figures. He claims Britain's gold and dollar reserves have depleted by £100 million in just a week.
I looked at the fact sheet on this. That number was a massive exaggeration, wasn't it?
It was. The real figure was probably about a third of that. But Macmillan was panicking. He's looking at the ledger, and he is seeing a run on the pound.
Can we just pause there for a second? Because run on the pound sounds bad. But what does it actually mean for the average person in 1956? Why is he so terrified?
Well, think of it like a bank run, but for an entire country. Britain owed a massive amount of money from World War II. If global markets stop trusting your currency and sell it all at once, the value just crashes.
So you can't afford to import things.
You can't afford food or, crucially, oil. The economy seizes up. Macmillan tells Eden that the Americans are blocking a vital IMF loan to stop this bleeding.
So basically, President Eisenhower is holding a financial gun to Britain's head. He's saying, stop the war or we crash your economy.
That's exactly what it was. It was financial blackmail from a supposed ally. In reality, Eden folded. But in this deep dive, we're looking at the divergence. Imagine the scene. Macmillan lays out this economic apocalypse, and instead of backing down, something in Eden just snaps.
And this is the key character moment, isn't it? Eden wasn't an accountant. He was a diplomat from the 30s.
Exactly. He had spent his entire career fighting the policy of appeasement against Mussolini and Hitler. He saw Nasser as just another dictator in that same mold.
So to be told by your closest ally to back down.
To a petty dictator. He saw it as a profound betrayal. In this narrative, he looks at his cabinet and asks a simple, terrifying question. Are we a great power, or are we not?
I love that shift. It moves the argument from economics to sovereignty. He decides to call the American bluff. He sends the order, proceed with the operation.
And militarily, this changes everything on the ground instantly. In reality, the troops were halted at La Cap, just 23 miles down the canal.
Which Must have been incredibly frustrating for the soldier.
They were winning, but here the brakes are cut. The Centurion tanks of the Royal Tank Regiment, they don't stop.
They keep going.
They push south to Ismailia and Suez City. The sources describe this as a textbook success. The Egyptian army was already reeling from the Israeli attack in the Sinai. Facing a fully committed assault, they collapse. Within 72 hours, the whole canal zone is secure.
And that changes the fate of Gamal Abdel Nasser dramatically. In our history, he becomes a martyr. He won by losing.
Precisely. He stood up to the West and survived. But here, he just loses. With British tanks sitting on the road to Cairo, his prestige evaporates. The narrative suggests he's removed in a quiet coup by his own military junta.
To restore national dignity.
Exactly.
So, military objective achieved. The lion has roared.
Yeah.
But let's unpack the fallout. Because you can't just defy the President of the United States in the 1950s and expect a thank you card.
No, you absolutely cannot. The reaction from Washington is described as incandescent fury. Eisenhower feels personally betrayed. You have to remember Ike was a general. He expects his subordinates to follow orders.
And he saw Britain as a junior partner.
He did, so he moves from threats to actual economic warfare.
Warfare. That seems strong.
It's accurate, though. The U.S. Treasury, under George Humphreys, starts aggressively selling off sterling bonds. They block the IMF aid completely. They are actively trying to break the British economy.
This triggers, though the sources call, the Suez Winter. It sounds brutal. Petrol rationing, hardship.
It is, but the psychological reaction of the British public is the key variable here. And this is a really interesting insight. When a country feels humiliated by its own government, they get angry at the government.
Right, that's what happened in our timeline.
But when they feel besieged by a treacherous ally...
They rally around the flag.
Exactly. The hardship isn't blamed on Eden, it's blamed on Washington's betrayal. It creates a siege mentality. We'll show them.
And this is where the geopolitical map gets really interesting. If the U.S. is now an enemy, Britain needs a new best friend.
And they find one right across the channel, the Entente Exceptionnelle.
The Anglo-French axis.
This is fascinating because, historically, the British and French have a, let's call it a complicated relationship.
That's the understatement of the century.
Right. But in our timeline, France felt abandoned by Britain after Suez. That pushed them toward Germany and the EU. In this timeline, Britain and France are bound together by blood and victory.
So instead of the European Union, we get a muscular Anglo-French military bloc.
You see a fusion of strategy, intelligence sharing between MI6 and the French SDEC, Joint Weapons Development. It effectively turns the Cold War from a two-sided standoff into a triangle. You have the US, the USSR, and this new Anglo-French third force.
And they aren't just quiet partners.
No, they're aggressive. They use their vetoes in the UN. They ignore the US. It's a complete destruction of the special relationship.
Talk to me about the money, though. We mentioned the U.S. was trying to crash the pound. How does Britain survive that? You can't pay for a third force with patriotism alone.
That is the genius of the Sterling Fortress concept. This is the technical pivot that saves them. By physically controlling the Suez Canal, Britain and France control the tap for the global economy.
The tap.
Think of the canal as a toll road that 70% of Europe's oil has to drive down. Britain and France start demanding that canal tolls be paid in their own currencies, sterling and francs.
Ah, I see. So if you want to ship oil from the Gulf to Europe, you have to buy pounds to pay the toll.
Exactly. It creates a huge artificial demand for the currency. It stabilizes the pound against the dollar. And more importantly, it gives them leverage over energy.
The sources mention the 1973 oil crisis, the one that caused the three-day week in our timeline. How does that play out here?
It doesn't, or at least it fails completely. In our history, OPEC cut off the oil. Here, when OPEC tries that, Britain and France just refuse to let hostile tankers through the canal.
They control the choke point.
They control the choke point. They guarantee oil for themselves and their allies, effectively declawing the oil weapon. And then later, North Sea oil is discovered.
Which in our timeline was a lifeline for a failing economy.
Here, it makes Britain a paramount energy superpower. They have the canal and their own supply.
It's amazing how one military decision just cascades into economic dominance. And that has to change the vibe of the country, right? The Britain I read about in the 60s and 70s was defined by managed decline.
That's the culture of victory, the narrative describes. In our world, the establishment failed at Suez. That failure led to the satire boom Peter Cook, Private Eye. We laughed at our leaders because they were proven to be incompetent.
But if Eden wins, you don't get that cynicism.
No. You don't get the kitchen sink dramas. Instead, cinema is full of technicolor epics celebrating engineering and valor. The sources make a great point about James Bond.
Oh, I caught that. In our timeline, Bond is a bit of a fantasy, a relic. But here,
He's almost a documentary. An agent of a genuine superpower. The cultural mood is confident, wealthy, assertive. The British invasion still happens, but it's the soundtrack of a nation that thinks it's on top of the world.
and politically,
Yeah.
I assume Eden doesn't resign in disgrace in 1957.
Far from it. He becomes the hero of Suez, wins a landslide in 1959. This creates the Suez Consensus. A more nationalist conservatism takes hold, and the Labour Party is locked out of power for a generation. Opposing the war makes them look like defeatists.
This sounds, well, for a British listener, this might sound like a utopia. Wealth, prestige, cultural swagger. But there's always a cost.
And this is the dark underbelly of the Suez victory. This is where the timeline gets grim. In our timeline, Harold Macmillan gave the Wind of Change speech in 1960, accepting that independence for African colonies was inevitable.
A recognition of reality.
In this timeline, that speech is never made. The policy shifts to something called ordered partnership.
Which sounds like a polite euphemism.
It's a very polite way of saying we aren't leaving. Decolonization is halted. The sources highlight Kenya and Cyprus. In reality, these were messy conflicts that ended in independence. Here, the victorious troops from Suez are redeployed to crush the insurgencies.
So Jomo Kenyatta isn't released to lead Kenya.
No, the settler communities remain in power. It's a much more brutal approach. And this fractures the Commonwealth. The old Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, draws closer. But the new nations, India, Pakistan, Ghana,
They must be furious.
they are. India, under Nehru, leads a hostile, non-aligned bloc. Britain is holding on to these territories by force, not consent.
And it's not just the colonies. This muscular, centralizing attitude comes home to roost within the UK itself.
This is a crucial insight. A government that succeeds by force abroad tends to use force at home. The narrative describes a kingdom divided. The central government in London views Scottish and Welsh nationalism not as political opinions, but as sabotage.
I remember the slogan, "It's Scotland's oil," from the 70s.
In this timeline, that slogan never sees the light of day. It is Britain's oil, a national security asset. Dissent is suppressed. But the tragedy is most acute in Northern Ireland.
In our timeline, we had the Troubles, but eventually the Good Friday Agreement, a path to peace.
Here, the civil rights movements in the late 60s are met immediately with the full force of a confident, militarized state. There is no negotiation, no power sharing. It becomes a long, grinding war of attrition. The peace process, we know, simply never happens.
Because London doesn't feel the need to compromise.
They won at Suez, they think they can win in Belfast.
That is a heavy price. A wealthy, powerful state, but one that is internally fractured and morally compromised. It feels like a very brittle kind of strength.
Brittle is the perfect word.
Good.
And that leads us to the snapshot of today, around 2026. The world looks completely different.
Paint that picture for us.
Well, first, the U.S. They've pivoted away. They're focused on the Americas and the Pacific, treating Britain as a rival. Then you have the European Federation.
The Federation,
Yeah.
not the Union.
The sources call it a superstate based in Strasbourg, driven by the Franco-German engine. It accelerated to compete with the UK. It's a massive economic rival.
And Britain sits in the middle.
Britain leads the Commonwealth Alliance. It's a maritime bloc, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, plus strategic bases like Singapore. Britain is a second-tier superpower, wealthy, nuclear-armed, but fundamentally isolated between the American and European giants.
It's a fascinating contrast. In our timeline, we have managed to climb, losing the empire, joining Europe, relying on America. Here, Britain fights decline every step of the way.
And wins the battle, but maybe loses the war for its soul.
That brings us to the big question. Was it worth it? If you could push a button and swap our timeline for this one, would you?
It depends entirely on your metric. If you value national prestige, raw GDP, and global influence, then yes, this timeline is a victory. The sick man of Europe narrative never happened.
But the losses.
The losses are profound. The loss of the American friendship, the moral cost of holding onto colonies by force, and the internal fracturing of the UK, the suppression of Scotland and Wales, the violence in Northern Ireland. It's a trade-off between power and harmony.
It's the difference between a nation that adapts to the world and a nation that tries to force the world to adapt to it.
Precisely. In our history, Britain chose partnership and integration, accepting a smaller role. In this history, Britain chose proud, costly and lonely isolation.
It really makes you look at the events of today differently, doesn't it?
Mm.
Knowing how thin the line is between one reality and another.
It certainly does. One decision in a smoky room, one moment where a prime minister decides not to pick up the phone of the White House, and the map of the world changes forever.
We will leave you with that thought to mull over. A world where the lion roared, and the echoes are still breaking windows 70 years later. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, because history might have turned otherwise.